Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that immediate, informal collection of potential evidence at a crime scene in Washington, D.C. might seem to save time. However, considering the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's MPDC procedural guidelines and the District of Columbia's legal framework for evidence, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for an officer arriving at a scene where a discarded, potentially incriminating item is visible? Option A. Secure the scene and immediately contact a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit to initiate formal evidence collection procedures. Option B. Begin questioning bystanders about the item's origin before securing the item itself. Option C. Collect the item personally and place it in an evidence bag to ensure it is not lost or tampered with. Option D. Document the item's location in a personal notebook, but leave it undisturbed until a detective arrives, without securing the scene. The correct answer is A. Secure the scene and immediately contact a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit to initiate formal evidence collection procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal and ethical boundaries governing evidence collection and individual rights. The officer must act decisively while adhering strictly to the procedures outlined by the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, and relevant District of Columbia law. Failure to do so could compromise the investigation, lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, and result in disciplinary action or legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene and then contacting a supervisor and the appropriate investigative unit to initiate the formal evidence collection process. This approach is correct because it respects the chain of custody and ensures that evidence is gathered by trained personnel in a manner that preserves its integrity and admissibility in court, as mandated by MPDC policy and District of Columbia rules of evidence. It prioritizes legal compliance and investigative thoroughness over expediency. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer attempting to collect the evidence themselves without proper authorization or training in forensic procedures. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks contaminating the evidence, rendering it inadmissible. It also bypasses established MPDC protocols for evidence handling, potentially violating departmental regulations and the District of Columbia's legal standards for evidence integrity. Another incorrect approach is to immediately question potential witnesses without first securing the scene and notifying supervisors. This is professionally unacceptable as it could lead to the contamination of witness testimony through suggestion or undue influence, and it prioritizes immediate, potentially unreliable information gathering over systematic investigative procedures. Furthermore, it deviates from the MPDC established protocols for witness interviews and evidence preservation. A third incorrect approach is to disregard the potential evidence entirely due to the perceived inconvenience of following proper procedure. This is professionally unacceptable as it represents a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the MPDC commitment to thorough investigation and justice. It ignores the potential value of the evidence and violates the ethical obligation to investigate all leads thoroughly and legally. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and legal statutes. This involves 1. Assessing the immediate situation for safety and preservation of life. 2. Securing the scene to prevent contamination or loss of evidence. 3. Notifying appropriate supervisors and specialized units, e.g., detectives, forensic teams. 4. Following established protocols for evidence collection, witness interviews, and documentation. And 5. Maintaining a clear and accurate record of all actions taken. This systematic approach ensures both legal compliance and investigative effectiveness. Question 2. Strategic planning requires the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, to consider how to respond to a widely publicized civilian complaint alleging misconduct by an officer. The complaint has generated significant public outcry and media attention. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the MPDC leadership? Option A. Immediately release all details of the internal investigation, including witness statements and preliminary findings, to the media to demonstrate transparency and address public concerns. Option B. Issue a brief statement indicating the department is aware of the complaint but will not comment further due to ongoing internal processes, without initiating any public acknowledgement of the review. Option C. Initiate a formal internal investigation in accordance with MPDC policy, while preparing a carefully worded public statement acknowledging the complaint and the department's commitment to a thorough review, without compromising the integrity of the investigation or the rights of the officer. Option D. Publicly dismiss the allegations as unsubstantiated to protect the officer's reputation and the department's image, and refrain from initiating a formal investigation. The correct answer is C. Initiate a formal internal investigation in accordance with MPDC policy, while preparing a carefully worded public statement acknowledging the complaint and the department's commitment to a thorough review, without compromising the integrity of the investigation or the rights of the officer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining public trust and ensuring efficient departmental operations. The chief's decision requires careful judgment to balance these competing interests while adhering to the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's MPDC established policies and ethical guidelines. The best approach involves a transparent and policy-driven response. This means acknowledging the public's concern, initiating a thorough internal review process that aligns with MPDC disciplinary procedures and evidence-gathering protocols, and communicating the department's commitment to accountability. This approach is correct because it upholds the principles of due process for the officer, demonstrates respect for the public's right to information within legal and policy limits, and reinforces the MPDC dedication to maintaining high ethical standards and public confidence. It directly addresses the situation by following established procedures, which are designed to ensure fairness and thoroughness. An incorrect approach would be to immediately release all internal investigation details to the media. This fails to respect the privacy and due process rights of the officer involved, potentially jeopardizing the integrity of the investigation by prematurely disclosing sensitive information. It also risks violating MPDC policies regarding the disclosure of ongoing investigations. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the allegations outright without any investigation, citing the need to protect the department's reputation. This is ethically unsound, as it ignores potential misconduct and fails to uphold the department's duty to investigate credible concerns. It erodes public trust by appearing to shield officers from accountability. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the public concern and refuse to comment or investigate, focusing solely on internal processes without external communication. This demonstrates a lack of transparency and responsiveness, which can further damage public perception and create an impression of indifference to citizen complaints. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and procedures, ethical considerations, and transparent communication. This involves understanding the relevant regulations and guidelines, assessing the potential impact of different actions on all stakeholders, the public, the officer, the department, and choosing the course of action that best upholds the integrity and public trust of the MPDC. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal that Officer Miller, while on patrol in Washington, D.C., is approached by a citizen who is visibly upset and claims that another MPDC officer was rude and unprofessional during a recent traffic stop. The citizen is demanding immediate action and wants Officer Miller to do something about it right now. Officer Miller needs to decide how to best respond to this citizen's grievance. Option A. Officer Miller should calmly listen to the citizen's concerns, acknowledge their frustration, and explain the proper procedure for filing a formal complaint with the MPDC Internal Affairs Division. Option B. Officer Miller should tell the citizen that they are overreacting and that they should just forget about the incident. Option C. Officer Miller should immediately go find the officer in question and confront them about the citizen's allegations without any formal documentation. Option D. Officer Miller should offer to speak to the other officer informally to resolve the issue without the citizen needing to file a formal complaint. The correct answer is A. Officer Miller should calmly listen to the citizen's concerns, acknowledge their frustration, and explain the proper procedure for filing a formal complaint with the MPDC Internal Affairs Division. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because Officer Miller is faced with a situation where a citizen is expressing frustration and potentially making a complaint about a fellow officer's conduct. The officer must balance the citizen's right to voice concerns with the need to maintain professional decorum and ensure accurate reporting of any alleged misconduct. Failure to handle this appropriately could lead to a breakdown in community relations, an incomplete or inaccurate internal investigation, and potential disciplinary action for the officer involved. Careful judgment is required to de-escalate the situation, gather information effectively, and initiate the correct procedural steps. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves Officer Miller actively listening to the citizen's concerns, remaining calm and professional, and informing the citizen about the appropriate channels for filing a formal complaint. This approach is correct because it respects the citizen's right to be heard, acknowledges their grievance, and directs them to the established MPDC procedure for addressing complaints against officers. This aligns with MPDC General Order 301, which outlines procedures for citizen complaints and emphasizes fair and impartial investigation. By guiding the citizen to the correct process, Officer Miller ensures that the complaint is formally documented and can be investigated by the appropriate Internal Affairs Division, upholding accountability and transparency. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves Officer Miller dismissing the citizen's concerns and telling them to get over it. This is professionally unacceptable because it fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to complain and can be perceived as disrespectful and dismissive, further eroding trust between the community and the MPDC. It also bypasses the established complaint procedure, preventing any potential misconduct from being properly investigated. Another incorrect approach is for Officer Miller to immediately confront the officer being complained about without first gathering information or following protocol. This is professionally unacceptable as it could lead to a premature and potentially biased confrontation, jeopardizing the integrity of any future investigation. It also violates MPDC procedures that require a formal complaint to be filed and investigated through the proper channels before any disciplinary action or direct confrontation occurs. A third incorrect approach is for Officer Miller to offer to handle it himself by speaking to the other officer in an informal capacity without documenting the complaint. This is professionally unacceptable because it circumvents the official complaint process. It fails to create a formal record of the citizen's grievance, which is essential for accountability and for tracking patterns of behavior. It also lacks the due process required for investigating potential misconduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and ethical conduct. When faced with a citizen complaint, the framework should involve 1. Active listening and de-escalation to understand the citizen's perspective. 2. Identification of the appropriate procedural steps outlined in departmental orders, e.g., General Order 301 for citizen complaints. 3. Guiding the citizen to the correct process for formalizing their complaint. 4. Ensuring accurate documentation and reporting of the incident. This systematic approach ensures that all parties are treated fairly, investigations are conducted impartially, and departmental standards are maintained. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department officer, while on routine patrol in a public park, observes an individual discard a small, unmarked plastic baggie containing what appears to be a controlled substance into a trash receptacle. The officer has a strong suspicion that the substance is illegal, but the individual quickly walks away and is not apprehended. The officer is aware of the MPDC General Order on Evidence Handling and the District of Columbia's Rules of Criminal Procedure. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer in this situation? Option A. Retrieve the baggie from the trash receptacle, document its discovery and contents in a detailed incident report, and submit it to the evidence custodian according to MPDC procedures. Option B. Retrieve the baggie from the trash receptacle and hold it in the officer's personal patrol vehicle for later submission, intending to consolidate it with other potential evidence if further discoveries are made. Option C. Retrieve the baggie from the trash receptacle and dispose of it discreetly, believing it would be an unnecessary administrative burden to process such a small amount of suspected contraband. Option D. Leave the baggie in the trash receptacle, considering it de minimis and unrecoverable due to the individual's departure, and continue patrol. The correct answer is A. Retrieve the baggie from the trash receptacle, document its discovery and contents in a detailed incident report, and submit it to the evidence custodian according to MPDC procedures. Explanation. Benchmark analysis indicates that the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, faces complex scenarios requiring adherence to strict departmental policies and the District of Columbia's code. This particular scenario presents a challenge because it involves a potential conflict between an officer's personal observations and the established procedures for handling evidence, which are critical for maintaining the integrity of investigations and ensuring due process. The officer must navigate the delicate balance of acting on a strong suspicion while respecting the legal framework governing evidence collection and reporting. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all observations and actions taken, and then strictly adhering to MPDC General Order on Evidence Handling and the District of Columbia's Rules of Criminal Procedure regarding the chain of custody and reporting. This means securing the observed contraband in a manner consistent with departmental policy, preparing a detailed incident report that accurately reflects the discovery and seizure, and ensuring the evidence is properly logged and transferred to the evidence custodian without any deviation. This approach is correct because it upholds the legal and ethical obligations to preserve evidence integrity, prevent tampering, and ensure that all actions taken by law enforcement are transparent and defensible in court. It directly aligns with the MPDC commitment to lawful policing and the District of Columbia's legal standards for evidence management. An incorrect approach would be to dispose of the observed contraband without proper documentation or seizure, even if the officer believes it is minor or insignificant. This failure to follow established evidence handling protocols violates MPDC General Order on Evidence Handling and undermines the principle of due process. It creates a significant risk of evidence being deemed inadmissible in court, potentially jeopardizing any subsequent investigation or prosecution. Another incorrect approach would be to personally hold onto the contraband for a period before submitting it, or to discuss its discovery with unauthorized personnel. This breaches the chain of custody requirements, introduces opportunities for contamination or loss, and violates MPDC policies designed to prevent such breaches. It also raises ethical concerns about potential bias or mishandling of evidence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and legal statutes. This involves first identifying the relevant departmental policies and legal requirements applicable to the situation. Then, assess the observed facts against these requirements. If a discrepancy or potential violation is identified, the professional must choose the course of action that most closely aligns with policy and law, even if it seems less expedient. Documentation is paramount at every step. In situations involving potential evidence, the default action should always be to follow the prescribed procedures for collection, preservation, and reporting, unless a specific policy-approved exception applies. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that an officer of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, observes a known acquaintance who is not a fellow officer committing a minor traffic violation while on duty. The officer has a friendly but not intimate personal relationship with the acquaintance. The officer is aware that reporting this violation will likely result in a citation for the acquaintance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the MPDC officer? Option A. Immediately report the observed traffic violation through the proper departmental channels, including any required documentation. Option B. Make a mental note of the violation but refrain from reporting it to avoid potential personal repercussions or perceived favoritism. Option C. Discreetly signal the acquaintance to acknowledge the officer's presence and then continue on patrol without taking further action. Option D. Approach the acquaintance privately, inform them of the violation, and suggest they pull over and correct the issue themselves. Correct answer is A. Immediately report the observed traffic violation through the proper departmental channels, including any required documentation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a sworn duty to uphold the law and the personal relationship with an individual who may have violated it. The MPDC officer is placed in a position where their impartiality and integrity are tested. Need for careful judgment arises from the potential for bias, the duty to report misconduct, and the importance of maintaining public trust in law enforcement. The best professional approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the observed infraction to the appropriate supervisory authority. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the MPDC Code of Conduct and departmental policies regarding officer conduct and reporting procedures. Specifically, officers are mandated to report any observed violations of law, regardless of the perpetrator's identity, to ensure accountability and uphold the principle of equal application of the law. This action demonstrates integrity, impartiality, and a commitment to the rule of law, which are foundational ethical principles for law enforcement officers. It also initiates the proper investigative process, allowing for an objective assessment of the situation. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the infraction due to the personal relationship. This fails to uphold the officer's oath to enforce the law and violates departmental policy requiring reporting of all observed violations. It compromises the officer's integrity and creates a perception of favoritism, eroding public trust. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the individual privately and request they rectify the situation without involving the department. While seemingly a less confrontational option, this bypasses established reporting protocols and investigative procedures. It places the officer in a dual role of investigator and informal mediator, which can lead to conflicts of interest and an incomplete or biased resolution. The MPDC has specific procedures for handling violations, and deviating from these undermines the fairness and thoroughness of the process. A final incorrect approach would be to report the infraction, but omit details about the personal relationship. This is a failure of transparency and honesty. While reporting the violation itself is a step in the right direction, withholding crucial context that could influence the investigation or perception of bias is ethically problematic and may violate departmental regulations concerning complete and accurate reporting. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy, ethical obligations, and the principle of impartial law enforcement. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest, understanding reporting mandates, and acting with transparency and integrity at all times. When faced with a situation involving personal connections and potential misconduct, the primary consideration must be the duty to the public and the integrity of the law enforcement agency. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that a new dispatch system promises significantly faster call processing times for the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. However, concerns have been raised by some officers regarding potential inaccuracies in the new system's data input and the impact on officer safety protocols during high-stress situations. Considering these factors, which of the following approaches best balances the pursuit of efficiency with the MPD's core responsibilities? Option A. Implement a phased pilot program in a select precinct to thoroughly test the new dispatch system, gather officer feedback, and assess its impact on response accuracy and safety protocols before considering wider deployment. Option B. Rely solely on the vendor's assurances of the system's reliability and efficiency, and proceed with a full department-wide implementation. Option C. Immediately deploy the new dispatch system across all precincts to capitalize on the promised efficiency gains and address potential backlog issues. Option D. Focus exclusively on optimizing the speed of dispatching calls, assuming that faster response times inherently equate to improved public safety, and address any operational issues as they arise. Correct answer is A. Implement a phased pilot program in a select precinct to thoroughly test the new dispatch system, gather officer feedback, and assess its impact on response accuracy and safety protocols before considering wider deployment. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential for improved response times in the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, through the implementation of a new dispatch system. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the paramount duty of ensuring public safety and officer well-being. Decisions made here have direct implications for the MPD's ability to respond to emergencies, allocate resources effectively, and maintain public trust. Careful judgment is required to assess the true impact of proposed changes beyond mere speed, considering factors like accuracy, officer safety protocols, and community impact. The best approach involves a comprehensive pilot program that rigorously tests the new dispatch system in a controlled environment before full-scale implementation. This approach is correct because it aligns with the MPD's commitment to evidence-based decision-making and responsible adoption of new technologies. Specifically, it allows for the identification and mitigation of potential flaws, ensures that officer training is adequate, and provides data to confirm that response times are not only faster, but also more effective and safe for both the public and officers. This methodical process minimizes risk and maximizes the likelihood of successful integration, adhering to the MPD's overarching mission of serving and protecting the citizens of Washington, D.C. An approach that prioritizes immediate, department-wide rollout of the new system without adequate testing is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the critical need for validation of new technologies in a public safety context, potentially leading to system failures, increased response errors, or compromised officer safety. Such a hasty implementation disregards the ethical obligation to ensure that any change enhances, rather than detracts from, the MPD's core functions. Another unacceptable approach is to implement the new system solely based on vendor claims of efficiency, without independent verification or consideration of MPD-specific operational needs and existing protocols. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an abdication of responsibility to thoroughly vet technologies that directly impact public safety. It also overlooks the importance of officer input and feedback, which is crucial for successful technology adoption. Finally, an approach that focuses only on reducing dispatch times without evaluating the quality or accuracy of the information relayed to officers is also professionally deficient. The goal is not just speed, but effective and safe dispatching. Ignoring the qualitative aspects of dispatching can lead to misallocated resources, incorrect tactical decisions, and increased risk to officers and the public. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem or opportunity, improved response times. This should be followed by thorough research into potential solutions, including an assessment of their alignment with departmental mission and values. A critical step is risk assessment, identifying potential negative consequences of each option. Pilot testing and data collection are essential for validating proposed solutions before widespread adoption. Finally, continuous evaluation and adaptation are necessary to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance with evolving public safety needs. Question 7. The efficiency study reveals that overtime expenditures within the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department have significantly increased in the past fiscal year, impacting the overall departmental budget. Simultaneously, data indicates a rise in certain types of property crimes in specific neighborhoods, while response times to non-emergency calls have also seen a slight increase across the district. Given these findings, which of the following strategies represents the most effective and ethically sound approach for the MPDC to address these interconnected issues? Option A. Immediately implement a district-wide freeze on all overtime, redirecting any savings directly to fund additional administrative staff to process paperwork more efficiently, thereby indirectly freeing up patrol officers. Option B. Reassign patrol officers from precincts with lower reported crime rates to areas experiencing increased property crime, without a detailed analysis of call volume or overtime patterns, based on recent media reports highlighting specific incidents. Option C. Increase the number of officers assigned to community outreach programs in low-crime areas to improve public perception, while deferring any adjustments to patrol staffing or overtime management until the next budget cycle. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of patrol unit deployment patterns, analyzing crime data, call for service volume, and overtime accrual by precinct to strategically reallocate resources and adjust staffing levels, prioritizing areas with the highest crime rates and longest response times, while also exploring targeted overtime reduction strategies that do not compromise essential services. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of patrol unit deployment patterns, analyzing crime data, call for service volume, and overtime accrual by precinct to strategically reallocate resources and adjust staffing levels, prioritizing areas with the highest crime rates and longest response times, while also exploring targeted overtime reduction strategies that do not compromise essential services. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical juncture in resource allocation for the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term strategic goals, all while adhering to strict budgetary constraints and departmental policies. Officers are tasked with making on-the-spot decisions that have ripple effects on public safety and departmental effectiveness. Careful judgment is required to ensure that resource deployment maximizes public benefit and officer safety without compromising investigative integrity or community trust. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the data, considering both quantitative metrics and qualitative intelligence, to inform a strategic reallocation of patrol units. This approach is correct because it aligns with the MPDC mandate to provide effective and efficient public safety services within the District of Columbia. It prioritizes data-driven decision-making, a cornerstone of modern policing, ensuring that resources are directed where they are most needed and can have the greatest impact. This also reflects an ethical obligation to taxpayers to use public funds responsibly and effectively. By considering all available information, including crime trends, community feedback, and officer deployment patterns, the department can make informed decisions that enhance public safety and optimize operational readiness. An approach that focuses solely on reducing overtime costs without considering the impact on patrol coverage is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the primary mission of the MPDC, which is public safety. Cutting essential patrol hours to meet a financial target could lead to increased response times, reduced visibility, and a potential rise in crime, thereby undermining the department's core function. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to reallocate officers based on anecdotal evidence or pressure from specific community groups without a thorough, data-backed analysis. While community engagement is vital, decisions regarding resource allocation must be grounded in objective data to ensure fairness and effectiveness across all areas of the district. Relying on subjective input alone can lead to inefficient deployment and may not address the most pressing public safety concerns. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes the deployment of officers to high visibility, low-impact areas solely to create a perception of increased police presence, while neglecting areas with higher crime rates, is also professionally unsound. This strategy prioritizes public perception over actual crime reduction and public safety, which is an ethical failure and a misallocation of valuable resources. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted analysis. First, clearly define the problem and the objectives, e.g., improve response times, reduce crime in specific areas, manage overtime. Second, gather and analyze all relevant data, including crime statistics, call for service data, demographic information, and community feedback. Third, identify potential solutions and evaluate them against established criteria, such as effectiveness, cost, feasibility, and adherence to MPDC policies and ethical guidelines. Fourth, consult with relevant stakeholders, including precinct commanders, patrol officers, and community leaders, to gain diverse perspectives. Finally, implement the chosen solution, monitor its effectiveness, and be prepared to make adjustments as needed. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that certain patrol units in the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department are experiencing delays in receiving critical, time-sensitive intelligence regarding active criminal investigations due to the current communication methods. This is impacting their response times and operational effectiveness. Considering the MPDC commitment to both operational efficiency and the strict adherence to privacy regulations and departmental orders concerning sensitive information, what is the most appropriate strategy to address this communication gap? Option A. Broadly distribute all newly acquired intelligence to all MPDC personnel via general email announcements to ensure everyone is informed, regardless of direct involvement in specific cases. Option B. Centralize all intelligence dissemination through a single designated officer for each precinct, who will then manually relay information to relevant units as deemed necessary. Option C. Implement a tiered system for information dissemination, utilizing secure, encrypted departmental communication platforms for sensitive intelligence, with clear guidelines on access levels and authorized recipients, coupled with mandatory annual training on data security and privacy protocols for all personnel. Option D. Encourage officers to utilize personal mobile devices and unsecured messaging applications for rapid information sharing to expedite response times, with a verbal reminder about discretion. The correct answer is C. Implement a tiered system for information dissemination, utilizing secure, encrypted departmental communication platforms for sensitive intelligence, with clear guidelines on access levels and authorized recipients, coupled with mandatory annual training on data security and privacy protocols for all personnel. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a critical need to reevaluate the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's MPDC internal communication protocols regarding the dissemination of sensitive case information. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the imperative of swift information sharing for operational effectiveness against the paramount duty of maintaining confidentiality and preventing unauthorized disclosure, which could jeopardize ongoing investigations, compromise witness safety, and erode public trust. The MPDC operates under a strict framework of departmental general orders, federal privacy laws, such as those governing the handling of criminal history information, and ethical standards that mandate discretion and accountability. The best approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes secure, authorized channels for information dissemination, while ensuring all personnel are adequately trained on the sensitivity of the data. This includes establishing clear protocols for who can access what information, under what circumstances, and through which approved systems. It also necessitates regular training on data security, privacy regulations, and the consequences of breaches. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the identified efficiency gap by streamlining communication within a secure and compliant framework, thereby upholding the MPDC legal and ethical obligations. It aligns with the principles of responsible information management and operational integrity, an approach that relies solely on informal communication channels, such as unsecured instant messaging or personal email, is professionally unacceptable. This method fails to provide an audit trail, lacks robust security measures, and significantly increases the risk of unauthorized access or accidental disclosure. It directly violates departmental policies on data handling and potentially federal privacy laws. Another unacceptable approach would be to restrict all information sharing to a single point of contact, regardless of the urgency or nature of the information. While this might seem to enhance control, it creates a bottleneck that undermines operational efficiency, delays critical decision-making, and can lead to frustration and workarounds that bypass established protocols. This approach fails to balance security with the practical needs of law enforcement operations. Finally, an approach that involves sharing information broadly without proper vetting or classification is also professionally unsound. This indiscriminate dissemination increases the likelihood of sensitive details falling into the wrong hands, potentially compromising investigations and endangering individuals. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the principles of information security and responsible data stewardship. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying the core problem, efficiency vs. security. They must then consult relevant departmental policies, federal regulations, and ethical guidelines. The next step is to brainstorm solutions that balance competing needs, evaluating each against established legal and ethical standards. Prioritizing solutions that offer both efficiency and robust security, with clear accountability mechanisms, is crucial. Continuous training and periodic review of protocols are essential to adapt to evolving threats and operational requirements. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that during a lawful arrest in a public area of Washington, D.C., a civilian begins recording the incident with their mobile phone from a distance of approximately 20 feet, remaining on the sidewalk and not interfering with the officer's actions. The arresting officer, feeling uncomfortable with being recorded, instructs the civilian to cease recording immediately. What is the most appropriate course of action for the arresting officer? Option A. Acknowledge the civilian's right to record, maintain a safe and effective operational distance, and clearly communicate any specific lawful restrictions on the civilian's behavior if they were to interfere with the arrest. Option B. Physically detain the civilian for recording the arrest, as this could be considered an obstruction. Option C. Order the civilian to immediately stop recording, citing the officer's discomfort as the reason. Option D. Ignore the civilian and their recording, regardless of any potential for disruption or interference with the arrest. The correct answer is A. Acknowledge the civilian's right to record, maintain a safe and effective operational distance, and clearly communicate any specific, lawful restrictions on the civilian's behavior if they were to interfere with the arrest. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a citizen's right to record and a law enforcement officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance the public's right to observe and document police activity with the need to ensure the safety of themselves, other officers, and the public, as well as the integrity of an ongoing investigation. Misjudging this balance can lead to violations of constitutional rights, departmental policy, or even criminal charges. The best approach involves de-escalation and clear communication while upholding constitutional rights. This means acknowledging the individual's right to record, establishing a safe distance if necessary to ensure operational effectiveness and safety without impeding the recording, and clearly articulating any lawful restrictions on their behavior, e.g., not interfering with the investigation. This aligns with the First Amendment's protection of free speech and the right to gather information, as well as the MPDC general orders regarding interactions with the public and the use of recording devices. The officer's actions should be guided by reasonableness and proportionality, ensuring that any limitations placed on the individual are narrowly tailored to address a specific, legitimate law enforcement need. An incorrect approach would be to immediately order the individual to stop recording, without any justification beyond personal discomfort or a desire to avoid scrutiny. This directly infringes upon the right to record police activity, which is a protected First Amendment activity in public spaces. Such an action would likely violate departmental policy and constitutional law, potentially leading to civil liability for the department and disciplinary action for the officer. Another incorrect approach would be to physically confront or detain the individual solely because they are recording, without any evidence of interference or obstruction. This constitutes an unlawful seizure and a violation of the individual's rights. The mere act of recording in itself does not constitute probable cause for arrest or detention. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the individual and their recording, even if their actions are becoming disruptive or interfering with the scene. While the right to record is protected, it is not absolute and can be subject to reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions if it genuinely impedes lawful police operations. Failing to address such interference, if it occurs, could compromise the investigation or public safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights, departmental policy, and officer safety. This involves assessing the situation objectively, identifying any potential threats or interference, communicating clearly and respectfully with the individual, and taking the least restrictive action necessary to achieve legitimate law enforcement objectives. If there is a need to restrict the individual's action, the justification must be based on specific, articulable facts demonstrating interference or a threat, not on a generalized desire to avoid being recorded. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, incurred significant overtime expenses in the last fiscal quarter. To better manage future budgets, a detailed breakdown of these costs is required. During the quarter, officers worked a total of 15,600 overtime hours. The standard overtime pay rate for MPDC officers is 1.5 times their regular hourly wage. The average regular hourly wage for officers is $35.00. Calculate the total overtime expenditure for the last fiscal quarter. Option A, $819,000. Option B, $327,600. Option C, $1,365,000. Option D, $546,000. The correct answer is A, $819,000. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical need for resource allocation within the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance operational demands with budgetary constraints, directly impacting public safety and departmental effectiveness. Accurate calculation and interpretation of overtime costs are paramount to ensuring responsible fiscal management and maintaining adequate staffing levels for critical services. The best professional practice involves a precise calculation of total overtime hours and their associated costs, factoring in the established overtime pay rate. This approach is correct because it adheres to the MPDC internal financial policies and general principles of public sector budgeting, which mandate transparent and accurate accounting of all expenditures. By directly calculating the total overtime expenditure, officers can provide a clear, data-driven justification for resource requests, or identify areas for potential cost savings. Aligning with the department's commitment to fiscal responsibility and efficient service delivery, as outlined in MPDC operational directives. An approach that calculates only the average overtime per officer without considering the total number of officers involved is incorrect. This fails to provide a comprehensive picture of the department's total overtime expenditure, leading to an underestimation of the financial impact and potentially flawed resource allocation decisions. It neglects the aggregate cost, which is essential for departmental budgeting and oversight. Another incorrect approach is to simply report the number of overtime hours without converting them into monetary costs. While the hours are a component of the calculation, they do not represent the actual financial burden on the department. This omission prevents a true understanding of the budgetary implications and hinders effective financial planning and control, violating the principles of sound financial management expected of public service organizations. A further incorrect approach is to estimate overtime costs based on a general percentage of regular salaries without performing a specific calculation. This method lacks the precision required for accurate financial reporting and decision-making. It introduces an unnecessary layer of approximation, which can lead to significant discrepancies between budgeted and actual expenses, potentially impacting the department's ability to fund essential operations or respond to unforeseen needs. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to financial analysis. This involves clearly identifying all relevant data points, overtime hours, pay rates, number of officers, selecting the appropriate mathematical formula for calculation, performing the calculation accurately, and then interpreting the results in the context of departmental policies and objectives. This structured process ensures that decisions are based on reliable data and align with ethical and regulatory requirements. Question 11. The performance metrics show a sustained upward trend in reported shoplifting incidents at small businesses along a particular commercial corridor in Washington, D.C. As a patrol officer assigned to this sector, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to address this emerging crime pattern? Option A. Increase visible patrols in the affected area. Engage with business owners and residents to gather intelligence on potential suspects and patterns, and review available surveillance footage from the businesses. Option B. Document the trend in internal reports but refrain from proactive measures until a significant escalation of incidents occurs to avoid overburdening resources. Option C. Immediately implement a zero-tolerance policy, conducting stops and frisks of individuals who appear to fit a general description of potential shoplifters in the area. Option D. Advise precinct leadership to request additional uniformed officers for saturation patrols, focusing solely on apprehending individuals observed committing theft. The correct answer is A. Increase visible patrols in the affected area. Engage with business owners and residents to gather intelligence on potential suspects and patterns, and review available surveillance footage from the businesses. Explanation. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in reported incidents of petty theft within a specific patrol sector of Washington, D.C. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance proactive community engagement with effective crime prevention and enforcement, all while adhering to the strict guidelines of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, regarding evidence handling, community relations, and departmental policy. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any investigative actions are both lawful and build trust within the community. The best approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes community engagement and intelligence gathering. This includes increasing visible patrols in the affected areas, actively engaging with local businesses and residents to gather information about the patterns and potential perpetrators of the thefts, and reviewing existing surveillance footage. This approach is correct because it aligns with MPDC commitment to community policing, which emphasizes collaboration and information sharing to address crime effectively. It also adheres to departmental policy on proactive crime prevention and the ethical imperative to serve and protect the community by understanding and responding to their concerns. This method focuses on building a comprehensive understanding of the issue before initiating more direct enforcement actions, thereby minimizing the risk of over-policing or alienating residents. An approach that solely focuses on increasing arrests without understanding the underlying causes or community impact is professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to engage with the community as mandated by MPDC community policing philosophy and could lead to a breakdown in trust. Furthermore, initiating broad, suspicionless stops or searches based solely on increased incident numbers, without specific probable cause or reasonable suspicion tied to an individual, would violate constitutional rights and MPDC policy regarding lawful stops and searches. Another unacceptable approach would be to ignore the trend, assuming it will resolve itself. This demonstrates a dereliction of duty and fails to uphold the MPDC responsibility to maintain public safety and order. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data analysis, performance metrics, moves to intelligence gathering through community engagement and review of existing resources, then to strategic planning for patrol and enforcement, and finally to evaluation of the effectiveness of implemented strategies. This iterative process ensures that actions are informed, lawful, ethical, and responsive to the needs of the community. Question 12. The monitoring system demonstrates an individual exhibiting erratic behavior in a public park within Washington, D.C., appearing to be attempting to conceal an object in their waistband. The individual is not actively threatening anyone, but their movements are furtive and suggestive of potential criminal activity. An MPDC officer observes this from a distance. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer? Option A. Continue to observe from a distance without intervening, assuming the individual's actions do not constitute a direct threat to public safety at that moment. Option B. Immediately draw their service weapon and issue loud commands for the individual to drop any concealed items, preparing for a potential confrontation. Option C. Cautiously approach the individual, verbally command them to show their hands and reveal what they are concealing, while maintaining a safe distance and observing their reaction for signs of aggression or compliance, and preparing to secure the scene and any discovered evidence. Option D. Approach the individual casually, attempting to engage them in conversation to gauge their state of mind and intentions without directly addressing the suspicious behavior. The correct answer is C. Cautiously approach the individual, verbally command them to show their hands and reveal what they are concealing, while maintaining a safe distance and observing their reaction for signs of aggression or compliance, and preparing to secure the scene and any discovered evidence. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a critical juncture where officer discretion intersects with established departmental policy and the legal framework governing the use of force and evidence preservation within Washington, D.C. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to address a potential threat with the long-term imperative of maintaining the integrity of evidence and ensuring accountability. The officer must act decisively, yet judiciously, adhering to the principles of lawful conduct and the specific directives of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC. The best approach involves immediate, but controlled, intervention to secure the scene and the individual, followed by meticulous documentation and adherence to evidence handling protocols. This approach is correct because it prioritizes officer safety and public safety by neutralizing any immediate threat, while simultaneously safeguarding the integrity of potential evidence. MPDC policy, like that of most law enforcement agencies, mandates that officers preserve evidence to ensure fair and accurate legal proceedings. Furthermore, the ethical obligation to uphold justice requires that all actions taken are lawful and that any evidence gathered is obtained and handled in a manner that withstands legal scrutiny. This method ensures that the officer's actions are both effective in the moment and legally sound for future proceedings. An incorrect approach would be to immediately engage in a forceful apprehension without first attempting to de-escalate or assess the situation further, especially if the individual is not posing an immediate, overt threat. This could lead to an unnecessary escalation of force, potentially violating MPDC use of force guidelines and civil rights. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely or to delay intervention significantly, which could endanger the public or allow a crime to be committed or evidence to be destroyed. Failing to secure the scene and potential evidence promptly also compromises the integrity of any subsequent investigation and prosecution, undermining the justice system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a rapid threat assessment. This involves evaluating the immediate danger posed by the individual and the environment. Following this, Officers should consider de-escalation techniques if appropriate and safe. If intervention is necessary, the level of force used must be objectively reasonable and proportionate to the threat. Crucially, throughout and after the encounter, meticulous documentation and adherence to evidence preservation protocols are paramount. This systematic approach ensures that actions are justified, lawful, and contribute to a fair and effective justice process. Question 13. System analysis indicates that an MPDC officer is lawfully conducting a traffic stop on a public street in Washington, D.C. A civilian bystander begins recording the interaction from the public sidewalk, maintaining a respectful distance and not speaking to the officer or the driver. The officer feels uncomfortable being recorded. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Continue with the traffic stop, acknowledging the recording but taking no action unless the bystander interferes with the stop or creates a safety hazard. Option B. Instruct the bystander to move further away and confiscate their recording device until the stop is concluded. Option C. Immediately approach the bystander and demand they cease recording, citing the officer's discomfort. Option D. Ignore the bystander and proceed with the traffic stop as if they were not present, regardless of any potential perception of misconduct. The correct answer is A. Continue with the traffic stop, acknowledging the recording but taking no action unless the bystander interferes with the stop or creates a safety hazard. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a citizen's right to record police activity and the need for officers to maintain operational integrity and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests while adhering to Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, policies and relevant legal precedents, which can be nuanced and subject to interpretation in real time. Misjudging the situation could lead to a violation of civil rights, departmental policy, or compromise officer safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the citizen's right to record, while clearly and calmly informing them of any MPDC policies that might apply to their specific location or behavior, such as restrictions on recording within certain sensitive areas or prohibitions against interfering with an investigation. The officer should then proceed with their duties, making a mental note of the recording and the circumstances, and only intervene if the recording activity directly impedes their lawful duties or creates a safety hazard. This approach respects constitutional rights while upholding departmental responsibilities. Incorrect approach is analysis. Intervening solely because the citizen is recording, without any indication of interference or safety concern, violates the citizen's First Amendment right to record police activity in public spaces. This action is not supported by MPDC policy or legal precedent and could lead to a civil rights complaint. Demanding the citizen cease recording and confiscating their device without probable cause or a warrant constitutes an unlawful seizure and a violation of privacy rights. This is a severe breach of policy and law, exposing the department to significant legal liability. Ignoring the recording entirely and continuing with an action that might be perceived as overly aggressive or unprofessional, even if lawful, misses an opportunity to de-escalate and manage the situation proactively. While not a direct violation of recording rights, it fails to address potential perceptions of misconduct that the recording might capture and disseminate. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and respecting constitutional rights, followed by adherence to departmental policy and the specific circumstances of the encounter. When faced with a citizen recording, the initial step is to assess if the recording activity itself is lawful and non-interfering. If it is, the officer should proceed with their duties, documenting the encounter if necessary. If the recording activity becomes obstructive or poses a safety risk, the officer should issue a clear, specific warning referencing the relevant policy or law being violated, and only escalate to enforcement if the behavior persists. Question 14. The control framework reveals that Officer Miller, while on patrol in Washington, D.C., observes her direct supervisor, Sergeant Davis, accepting a small, unmarked envelope from a citizen at a traffic stop. Sergeant Davis quickly pockets the envelope without issuing a citation or making any notation in his log. Officer Miller is aware that accepting gratuities, even seemingly minor ones, is strictly prohibited by MPDC policy. Officer Miller is concerned about potential retaliation if she reports this incident. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Confront Sergeant Davis directly at the next opportune moment to question him about the envelope. Option B. Ignore the incident to avoid potential conflict and protect her own career within the MPDC. Option C. Document the incident in her personal notebook with date, time, location, and a factual description of what she observed, and then formally report the incident to Sergeant Davis's direct superior or the MPDC Internal Affairs Division. Option D. Discuss her observations with fellow officers during their break to gauge their opinions on how to proceed. Correct answer is C. Document the incident in her personal notebook with date, time, location, and a factual description of what she observed, and then formally report the incident to Sergeant Davis's direct superior or the MPDC Internal Affairs Division. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between a subordinate's duty to report potential misconduct and the potential for retaliation or negative repercussions from a superior. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation ethically and in accordance with MPDC regulations and the District of Columbia's public policy regarding employee reporting. The correct approach involves documenting the observed behavior and reporting it through the established internal channels, specifically to a supervisor's superior or the Internal Affairs Division, as outlined in MPDC policy and general principles of law enforcement ethics. This approach is correct because it upholds the integrity of the department by addressing potential policy violations and ensuring accountability. It aligns with the MPDC commitment to maintaining public trust and adhering to its code of conduct, which mandates reporting of misconduct. Furthermore, it protects the reporting officer by utilizing formal, documented procedures designed to investigate such claims without immediate personal reprisal. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the behavior, as this fails to uphold the officer's duty to report and could be interpreted as condoning or participating in misconduct, thereby undermining departmental integrity and public confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the supervisor directly and informally without documentation or reporting through official channels. This risks escalating the situation without a proper investigation, potentially leading to a he-said-she-said scenario where the reporting officer's credibility is undermined and the alleged misconduct goes unaddressed. Finally, discussing the matter with colleagues in a casual, non-official capacity before reporting is also an incorrect approach. While seeking advice might seem helpful, it can lead to gossip, speculation, and the premature disclosure of sensitive information, potentially compromising any future formal investigation and creating an unprofessional environment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and ethical obligations. This involves recognizing potential policy violations, understanding the established reporting mechanisms, documenting observations factually, and initiating the formal reporting process without undue delay or informal dissemination of information. The focus should always be on ensuring accountability and maintaining the integrity of the department and the public trust. Question 15. During the evaluation of a crime scene in Washington, D.C., a concerned civilian approaches officers and begins to ask intrusive questions and attempt to touch evidence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the MPDC officers to take? Option A. Calmly inform the civilian about the ongoing investigation, explain that their actions are interfering with the process, and clearly state the legal boundaries of their involvement, requesting they step back to a safe distance. Option B. Ignore the civilian's actions and continue with the investigation as if they were not present. Option C. Immediately detain the civilian and escort them away from the scene to prevent further interference. Option D. Verbally confront the civilian aggressively, demanding they leave the area immediately. The correct answer is A. Calmly inform the civilian about the ongoing investigation, explain that their actions are interfering with the process, and clearly state the legal boundaries of their involvement, requesting they step back to a safe distance. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge faced by law enforcement officers in Washington, D.C., balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement to adhere to established protocols and legal boundaries. The core of the challenge lies in the potential for a civilian to interfere with an ongoing investigation, which could compromise evidence, endanger officers, or obstruct justice. The decision-making process must prioritize public safety, officer safety, and the integrity of the investigation, all while respecting the rights of civilians. The best approach involves de-escalation and clear communication, aligning with the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's MPDC general orders and the principles of community policing. This approach prioritizes maintaining a professional demeanor, clearly articulating the boundaries of the investigation, and informing the individual of the legal implications of their actions without resorting to immediate physical intervention, unless absolutely necessary for safety. This respects the individual's right to be present while firmly establishing the parameters of lawful conduct. The MPDC commitment to procedural justice and community engagement mandates that officers attempt to resolve such situations through dialogue and education before escalating to more forceful measures. An incorrect approach would be to immediately detain or physically remove the individual without attempting verbal de-escalation or clearly explaining the situation. This could be seen as an overreach of authority, potentially leading to a complaint of excessive force or unlawful detention, violating the MPDC policies on the use of force in citizen interaction. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the individual's presence and allow them to continue interfering. This fails to uphold the officer's duty to protect the integrity of the investigation and could lead to the loss or contamination of critical evidence, thereby undermining the justice process. It also fails to address a potential safety risk. A further incorrect approach would be to issue threats or engage in aggressive verbal confrontation without first attempting a calm and informative explanation. This can escalate the situation unnecessarily, damage community relations, and potentially lead to a complaint of unprofessional conduct against the officer, contrary to the MPDC emphasis on respectful and professional interactions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate threat level. If no immediate threat to safety exists, the next step is to attempt verbal de-escalation and clear communication, explaining the situation and the legal boundaries. Officers should then observe the individual's response and adjust their actions accordingly, escalating only if necessary and in accordance with departmental policy and legal statutes. This systematic approach ensures that actions are proportionate, lawful, and ethically sound. Question 16. What factors determine an MPDC officer's obligation to report a potential conflict of interest when investigating a traffic violation involving a close personal friend in Washington, D.C.? Option A. The likelihood that the personal friend will request preferential treatment during the stop. Option B. The severity of the traffic violation and the potential for a significant fine or license suspension. Option C. The nature and closeness of the personal relationship and the potential for it to influence objective decision-making during the investigation. Option D. The officer's personal belief that they can remain impartial despite the personal relationship. The correct answer is C. The nature and closeness of the personal relationship and the potential for it to influence objective decision-making during the investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a sworn duty to uphold the law and the potential for personal bias or external pressure to influence an investigation. The MPDC officer must navigate a situation where a close personal relationship could compromise the integrity of their official duties, potentially leading to a violation of departmental policies and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure impartiality and maintain public trust. The best approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the personal relationship to a supervisor. This action demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and adherence to MPDC regulations concerning conflicts of interest. By informing superiors, the officer allows for an objective reassessment of the investigation's handling, ensuring that appropriate measures are taken to maintain impartiality, such as reassigning the case or implementing enhanced oversight. This aligns with the MPDC internal affairs policies, which mandate reporting of potential conflicts to prevent compromised investigations and uphold the principle of equal application of the law. An approach that involves proceeding with the investigation without disclosing the relationship is ethically unsound and violates MPDC policy. This failure to report a conflict of interest can lead to allegations of bias, obstruction of justice, and a severe breach of public trust. The officer's personal involvement, even if unintentional, could taint the evidence or influence decision-making, undermining the fairness of the investigation. Another unacceptable approach is to attempt to subtly influence the investigation to favor the acquaintance. This constitutes a direct violation of the officer's oath and MPDC regulations against favoritism and corruption. Such actions not only compromise the specific case, but also erode the credibility of the entire department. Finally, withdrawing from the investigation without informing a supervisor is also professionally deficient. While it might seem like an attempt to avoid conflict, it leaves a gap in investigative responsibility and does not address the underlying issue of potential bias. It also fails to follow proper departmental procedures for case reassignment, potentially hindering the investigation's progress. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and the preservation of integrity. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest early, understanding the relevant departmental regulations and ethical codes, and proactively communicating with supervisors to ensure appropriate action is taken to maintain impartiality and public trust. Question 17. The efficiency study reveals that officers responding to domestic disturbance calls in Washington, D.C., where mental health issues are suspected, often face rapidly escalating situations. A patrol unit arrives at a residence where a verbal argument has reportedly turned physical, and the reporting party states the individual involved is experiencing a severe mental health episode and has a history of erratic behavior. The individual is agitated, pacing, and shouting incoherently. What is the MPDC officer's primary responsibility in this initial encounter? Option A. Wait for specialized mental health crisis unit personnel to arrive before making any attempt to engage with the individual. Option B. Immediately attempt to de-escalate the situation through calm communication and by seeking to understand the individual's distress while ensuring the safety of all present. Option C. Immediately attempt to physically restrain the individual to prevent further escalation and ensure officer safety. Option D. Treat the situation as a standard domestic disturbance and proceed with standard arrest protocols if probable cause for assault is established. The correct answer is B. Immediately attempt to de-escalate the situation through calm communication and by seeking to understand the individual's distress while ensuring the safety of all present. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential gap in the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's MPDC response protocols for domestic disturbance calls, particularly concerning the handling of escalating situations involving individuals with known mental health challenges. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance immediate public safety with the nuanced needs of individuals experiencing mental health crises, all while adhering to MPDC policies and District of Columbia laws regarding use of force and de-escalation. The potential for misinterpretation of behavior, rapid escalation, and adverse outcomes necessitates a highly calibrated and informed response. The most effective approach involves immediate, calm communication and de-escalation techniques, prioritizing the safety of all parties involved while seeking to understand the underlying issues. This aligns with MPDC training mandates and the District of Columbia's emphasis on crisis intervention and de-escalation. Specifically, officers are trained to recognize signs of mental distress and to employ strategies that reduce tension, build rapport, and facilitate a peaceful resolution. This approach respects the dignity of the individual experiencing a crisis and aims to avoid unnecessary force, which is a core ethical and legal imperative for law enforcement. An incorrect approach would be to immediately resort to physical restraint or forceful intervention without attempting de-escalation. This fails to acknowledge the specific training MPDC officers receive in handling mental health crises and violates the ethical principle of using the minimum necessary force. Such an action could exacerbate the situation, leading to injury or further distress for the individual and potentially creating a liability for the department. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the call as a routine domestic dispute and fail to inquire about or recognize potential mental health indicators. This demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and a failure to apply MPDC-specific protocols for mental health-related calls. It overlooks the critical information that could inform a safer and more effective response, potentially leading to a dangerous misjudgment. Finally, an approach that involves solely relying on backup officers to manage the situation without any initial attempt at communication or de-escalation by the first responding officer is also professionally deficient. While backup is crucial, the initial moments of contact are vital for establishing a rapport and assessing the situation. Delaying engagement can allow a situation to deteriorate, making a peaceful resolution more difficult. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes information gathering, threat assessment, and the application of appropriate de-escalation techniques, always mindful of MPDC policies and the specific vulnerabilities of individuals in crisis. This involves active listening, clear and concise communication, and a commitment to resolving the situation with the least amount of force necessary. Question 18. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate current patrol deployment strategies within the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. Considering the study's data on crime patterns and response times, what is the most prudent and effective course of action for the MPDC to consider in developing revised patrol plans? Option A. Analyze the study's findings to identify specific crime trends and high-risk areas. Then proactively engage with community leaders and residents to gather their input and concerns before proposing and implementing any adjustments to patrol routes and schedules. Option B. Immediately increase the number of marked patrol units in all areas identified as having higher crime rates in the study, without further consultation or analysis of community impact. Option C. Implement a radical shift in patrol tactics, such as a complete overhaul of beat assignments and response protocols, based solely on the study's statistical correlations, without pilot testing or community feedback. Option D. Maintain current patrol strategies, as the efficiency study's findings are considered preliminary and may not reflect long-term trends. The correct answer is A. Analyze the study's findings to identify specific crime trends and high-risk areas, then proactively engage with community leaders and residents to gather their input and concerns before proposing and implementing any adjustments to patrol routes and schedules. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential need for enhanced patrol strategies within the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance proactive crime prevention with responsive community engagement, all while adhering to departmental policies and the legal framework governing police conduct in Washington, D.C. The MPDC operates under a mandate to serve and protect the citizens of the district, which necessitates a nuanced approach to resource allocation and patrol tactics. Misinterpreting the study's findings or implementing strategies without proper consideration for community impact could lead to decreased public trust, inefficient use of resources, and potential legal challenges. The most effective approach involves a data-driven strategy that integrates the efficiency study's findings with community feedback and established policing principles. This approach prioritizes analyzing the study's data to identify specific crime patterns and areas requiring increased attention. Crucially, it mandates consultation with community leaders and residents to understand their concerns and perceptions of safety. This collaborative process ensures that any revised patrol strategies are not only data-informed, but also responsive to the needs and concerns of the community, thereby fostering trust and cooperation. This aligns with the MPDC commitment to community policing and its responsibility to operate transparently and accountably, as outlined in departmental general orders and the District of Columbia's public safety initiatives. An approach that solely focuses on increasing visible patrols in high-crime areas identified by the study, without engaging the community, is flawed. This method risks alienating residents, potentially leading to a perception of over-policing and a breakdown in communication, which is counterproductive to effective community relations and crime prevention. It fails to acknowledge the importance of community trust and partnership, which are fundamental to modern policing. Another ineffective approach is to dismiss the efficiency study's findings as merely an academic exercise and continue with existing patrol patterns. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to continuous improvement and evidence-based policing. It ignores the potential for optimizing resource deployment and overlooks opportunities to address emerging crime trends, which could negatively impact public safety and departmental effectiveness. Finally, an approach that proposes implementing drastic, untested patrol tactics based on a superficial reading of the study, without pilot testing or seeking input from experienced officers and community stakeholders, is professionally unsound. This can lead to wasted resources, officer burnout, and unintended negative consequences for the community, potentially violating principles of sound management and responsible governance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the data and its implications. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential strategies, considering their alignment with departmental policies, legal requirements, and community impact. Seeking input from all relevant stakeholders, including community members and departmental personnel, is essential before implementing any significant changes. A phased implementation with ongoing evaluation is also a critical component of responsible decision-making. Question 19. The efficiency study reveals a need to improve the MPD's response to community concerns regarding perceived overpolicing in certain neighborhoods. Officer Anya Sharma is tasked with developing a new strategy. Which of the following approaches best addresses this challenge, while adhering to the principles of community policing and departmental accountability in Washington, D.C.? Option A. Implement a series of town hall meetings across affected neighborhoods, inviting residents and community leaders to voice concerns directly to MPD leadership and patrol officers, and establish a feedback mechanism for follow-up actions. Option B. Increase uniformed patrol presence in the identified neighborhoods during peak hours, with a directive to issue more citations for minor infractions to deter loitering. Option C. Establish a dedicated task force to investigate historical complaints of overpolicing, with the primary goal of identifying officers for disciplinary action. Option D. Develop a public relations campaign highlighting the MPD's commitment to fair policing, using social media to disseminate positive stories about officer interactions. The correct answer is A. Implement a series of town hall meetings across affected neighborhoods, inviting residents and community leaders to voice concerns directly to MPD leadership and patrol officers, and establish a feedback mechanism for follow-up actions. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential need for enhanced community engagement strategies within the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPD. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the department's operational needs with the imperative to foster trust and collaboration with the diverse communities it serves. Missteps in community engagement can erode public confidence, hinder investigations, and exacerbate tensions. Careful judgment is required to implement strategies that are both effective in achieving departmental goals and respectful of community rights and concerns. The best approach involves a proactive and inclusive strategy that prioritizes building relationships through consistent, transparent, and two-way communication. This includes actively seeking input from community leaders and residents on policing priorities and concerns, and demonstrating a commitment to addressing those issues. Such an approach aligns with the MPD's mission to serve and protect all residents of Washington, D.C. by fostering a partnership based on mutual understanding and respect. This aligns with the ethical principles of community policing and the department's commitment to accountability and transparency. An approach that focuses solely on reactive measures, such as increasing patrols in response to isolated incidents without addressing underlying community concerns, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to build trust and can be perceived as heavy-handed, potentially alienating residents, and making them less likely to cooperate with law enforcement. Another unacceptable approach is to limit engagement to formal, infrequent meetings with a select few community representatives, as this excludes the broader community and may not capture the full spectrum of concerns or perspectives. Finally, an approach that relies on public relations campaigns without substantive changes in policing practices or genuine dialogue is also professionally deficient, as it lacks authenticity and is unlikely to foster lasting trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of community engagement. This should be followed by an assessment of the specific needs and concerns of the communities being served, utilizing a variety of communication channels to gather this information. Strategies should then be developed collaboratively, involving community members in their design and implementation. Ongoing evaluation and adaptation are crucial to ensure the effectiveness and responsiveness of engagement efforts. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that a police officer in Washington, D.C. worked 8 hours of overtime during the first bi-weekly pay period and 12 hours of overtime during the second bi-weekly pay period. According to Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPDC, policy, All overtime hours worked are compensated with compensatory time at a rate of 1. 5 hours of compensatory time for every 1 hour of overtime worked. What is the total amount of compensatory time the officer has earned? Option A, 30 hours. Option B, 15 hours. Option C, 20 hours. Option D, 24 hours. Correct answer is A, 30 hours. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a critical aspect of police work in Washington, D.C. involves managing resources efficiently and accurately, particularly when dealing with overtime and compensatory time. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a precise understanding of MPDC internal policies regarding overtime accrual and compensation, as well as the ability to perform accurate mathematical calculations under pressure. Mismanagement of these calculations can lead to financial discrepancies, potential disciplinary action, and erosion of trust within the department. The best professional approach involves meticulously calculating the total overtime hours worked, and then applying the correct compensatory time conversion rate as stipulated by MPDC policy. This approach ensures accuracy in reporting and compensation, adhering strictly to departmental regulations. Specifically, the calculation should sum all overtime hours worked across the 2 pay periods. For example, if an officer worked 8 hours of overtime in the first pay period and 12 hours in the second, the total is 20 hours. Then, applying the MPDC policy of 5 hours of compensatory time for every 1 hour of overtime, the total compensatory time earned would be /20 text hours times 5 equals 30 text hours /. This method directly reflects the departmental guidelines for overtime compensation, preventing under or overpayment and ensuring compliance. An incorrect approach would be to simply sum the overtime hours without applying the compensatory time conversion factor. This fails to adhere to MPDC policy, resulting in an inaccurate representation of earned compensatory time and potential financial loss for the officer or the department. Another incorrect approach would be to round the total overtime hours before applying the conversion rate, which introduces further inaccuracy and deviates from the precise calculations required by policy. Finally, an approach that uses a different, unapproved conversion rate would directly violate MPDC regulations and could lead to significant discrepancies and disciplinary issues. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the relevant departmental policies and procedures. This includes identifying the exact formula or rate for calculating overtime and compensatory time. Next, they should perform the calculations systematically, double-checking each step to ensure accuracy. If there is any ambiguity in the policy, seeking clarification from a supervisor or the relevant administrative department is crucial before proceeding.